right now, beneath your feet, there are about 8,000 miles of rock, metal, and unimaginable pressure stretching all the way to the center of the planet. We know this. We have mapped it with earthquake waves, probed it with the deepest drill holes ever bored into the crust, and modeled it with supercomputers. The evidence is overwhelming and unanimous. The Earth is not hollow. And yet, open your browser, type in hollow Earth, and watch what happens. Millions of results. YouTube videos with hundreds of thousands of views, forum threads stretching back years, full of people who genuinely believe that our planet is a shell, that somewhere near the poles there are gaping holes thousands of miles wide, that inside those holes there are forests and oceans and a miniature sun hanging in a perpetual sky, and that entire civilizations are living down there right now, watching us, waiting. Some say they are ancient humans. Some say they are aliens. Some say they are Nazis who fled Berlin in 1945 and found a new home beneath the Antarctic ice. This sounds absurd. It is absurd, and yet the idea will not die. The hollow Earth theory is one of the most persistent pseudoscientific beliefs in human history. It has survived the scientific revolution, the age of industrialization, 2 world wars, the space race, the internet revolution, and the complete mapping of our planet's interior by seismologists. It has been debunked so thoroughly and so many times that debunking it again almost feels redundant. And still it persists. Still, it recruits new believers every single year. So the question is not really whether the Earth is hollow. We know it is not. The question is something far more interesting. Why does this idea refuse to go away? What is it about the human mind, about our deepest instincts and our oldest stories, that keeps dragging us back underground? To answer that, we need to go all the way back to the beginning. Not the beginning of geology or of modern science, but the beginning of human storytelling itself. Because the hollow Earth did not start in a laboratory or a university lecture hall. It started in the darkness of caves, around flickering fires, in the imaginations of people who looked at the ground beneath them and wondered what was hiding down there. This is the story of how a beautiful, impossible idea was born, how it grew, how it was proven wrong, and how it survived anyway. And along the way, we are going to meet some truly extraordinary characters. A comet-hunting astronomer who thought the northern lights were leaking out of a hollow planet, a decorated war hero who spent his last decade mailing letters to world leaders, insisting the poles had giant holes in them. A self-proclaimed messiah in Florida who believed we live on the inside of the Earth, and a pseudoscientific dietitian who forged a polar explorer's diary and accidentally launched a conspiracy theory that survives to this day. It is a wild ride, and it starts exactly where you would expect it to, in the dark. Every civilization that has ever existed has told stories about what lies beneath the surface of the Earth. This is one of those rare ideas that appear independently in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, with no possible contact between them. It is as close to a universal human myth as anything we have ever found. The ancient Greeks envisioned an entire kingdom below the ground. They called it Hades, after the god who ruled over it, a vast and shadowy realm where the dead went after they left the world of the living. To reach Hades, you had to cross rivers with names like Styx and Lethe, rivers of hatred and forgetfulness. And you would be ferried across by a boatman named Charon, who demanded a coin for passage. The geography of the Greek underworld was elaborate and specific. There were fields of punishment for the wicked, meadows of peace for the virtuous, and a great palace where the god of death sat on his dark throne. This was not a vague metaphor. The Greeks thought of the underworld as a physical place, reachable through certain caves and crevices in the landscape. The Norse built something similarly vivid beneath their version of reality. Svartalfheim, the realm of the dark elves, and Niflheim, the frozen underworld where the dead resided. Both occupied the lower branches of Yggdrasil, the great world tree whose roots reached down into unfathomable depths. The idea that the roots of the visible world plunged into hidden worlds below was central to Norse cosmology. The serpent Nidhogg gnawed endlessly at those roots, threatening to topple everything above. Halfway around the world, Hindu mythology described Patala, a subterranean kingdom inhabited by the Nagas, half-human, half-serpent beings, who possessed incredible technology and jeweled hoods that lit their underground palaces with a glow that substituted for sunlight. According to the texts, there were 7 layers to the underworld, each with its own ruler, its own atmosphere, its own ecosystem. In the Bengali version of the Ramayana, the heroes Rama and Lakshmana are kidnapped by the king of this underground realm and must be rescued by the monkey god Hanuman. Native American traditions carry strikingly similar themes. The Navajo tell of ancestors who emerged from a subterranean world, driven to the surface by a great flood. The Hopi believe that a sacred entrance called a Sipapu exists somewhere in the Grand Canyon, connecting our world to the underworld from which their people originally came. The Mandan people of the northern plains say their forebears emerged from a cave on the north bank of the Missouri River. The Pueblo peoples place their god's origin in the inner earth. Across South America, the Inca traced their ancestors to caves east of Cusco. Brazilian tribes along the Paraná River claim their forefathers came from underground, and that many of their relatives still live there. In Celtic mythology, the cave of Cruachan, known as Ireland's gate to hell, was said to release strange creatures onto the surface of the earth. Medieval Irish knights reportedly made pilgrimages to caves they believed led to a place of purgatory inside the planet. In Tibet, Buddhist tradition speaks of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of enlightenment said to exist somewhere deep beneath the Himalayan mountains. A closely related legend describes Agartha, a vast subterranean realm connected to the surface through secret tunnels and governed by beings of extraordinary wisdom. The king of Agartha, according to some traditions, communicates his instructions to the Dalai Lama through hidden passageways linking the inner earth to Tibet. What is remarkable about all of these stories is not just that they exist, but that they share such deep structural similarities again and again across every continent and every era. human beings have imagined that the ground beneath them conceals another world, often one that is older, wiser, more powerful, and more mysterious than the world above. It is as if there is something hardwired into us, some ancient instinct that insists there must be more to this planet than what we can see. And it was from this deep well of myth that the first attempt at a scientific theory of the hollow earth would eventually emerge. But it did not come from a mystic or a priest. It came from one of the most brilliant astronomers who ever lived. Edmund Halley is one of those figures whose reputation rests on a single spectacular achievement, which is a shame, because the man was extraordinary across multiple fields. Most people know him for Halley's Comet, the famous periodic comet that he was the first to predict would return, confirming that comets are not random, one-time celestial visitors, but objects in regular orbits around the sun. That prediction, made in 1705 and confirmed in 1758, 16 years after his death, was one of the great triumphs of Newtonian physics. But Halley was far more than a comet chaser. He was a geophysicist, a mathematician, a cartographer, a sea captain, and a fellow of the Royal Society. He commanded a Royal Navy vessel on a scientific voyage across the Atlantic, personally mapped the magnetic variations of the Earth's field, and helped finance the publication of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, arguably the most important scientific book ever written. Without Halley's encouragement and financial support, Newton might never have published his masterwork. And it was Halley's deep engagement with the problem of Earth's magnetism that led him, in 1692, to propose one of the most audacious ideas in the history of science. The problem was this: ship captains crossing the oceans relied on compasses, and compasses relied on the Earth's magnetic field. But the field was not constant. It shifted over time. Compass readings that were accurate in one decade became unreliable in the next, creating a serious navigational hazard. Halley had personally documented these magnetic anomalies during his voyages, and he needed an explanation. His solution was breathtaking in its creativity and its ambition. He proposed that the Earth was not a single solid sphere, but instead consisted of multiple nested shells, one inside the other, like a set of Russian dolls. The outer shell, he estimated, was about 500 miles thick. Inside, it sat two more concentric shells and an innermost core, each separated by its own atmosphere, and each with its own set of magnetic poles. The shells, Halley suggested, rotated at slightly different speeds, and it was this differential rotation that caused the observed magnetic variations. It is a beautiful theory, elegant, imaginative, and completely wrong, but beautiful nonetheless. And Halley knew he was going out on a limb. He was acutely aware that proposing such a radical idea would invite skepticism, and he was careful to frame it not as an established fact, but as a hypothesis that might explain otherwise inexplicable observations. He even titled his Royal Society presentation in a way that acknowledged the audacity of the claim. Halley went further. He speculated that the atmospheres between the shells were luminous, possibly capable of supporting life. He even proposed an explanation for the aurora borealis, the northern lights, suggesting that they were caused by luminous gases escaping from the interior of the planet through thin spots in the crust near the poles. It is important to understand the context. In 1692, nobody had any real idea what the interior of the Earth looked like. There were no seismographs, no understanding of plate tectonics, no knowledge of the mantle or the core. The idea that the Earth might consist of concentric shells was not laughably absurd in the way it would be today. It was speculative, certainly, and Halley himself acknowledged that it was what he called an extravagant hypothesis, but it was grounded in the best observational data available at the time and was proposed by one of the most respected scientists in Europe. Halley presented his theory to the Royal Society, the most prestigious scientific body in England. It was published in the Philosophical Transactions and taken seriously enough to inspire decades of follow-up discussion. The Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler adapted the idea, proposing a simpler version with a single hollow interior and a small sun at the center. The Scottish mathematician John Leslie went further still, imagining two interior suns, which he named Pluto and Proserpine, but the theory was living on borrowed time. In 1774, a pair of researchers named Neville Maskelyne and Charles Hutton conducted what became known as the Schiehallion experiment, named after a mountain in the Scottish Highlands. By carefully measuring the gravitational attraction of the mountain, they were able to estimate the mean density of the Earth. Their calculations showed that the planet was roughly twice as dense as the rocks found on its surface. This meant that the interior had to be significantly denser than the crust, not less dense, and certainly not hollow. It was a devastating blow to Halley's elegant theory, and by the end of the 18th century, most serious scientists had moved on. Most, but not all. In 1818, a retired American Army captain named John Cleves Sims Jr. did something remarkable. He sat down, composed a declaration, and mailed it at considerable personal expense to every notable government, university, scientific society, and legislature he could find. 500 copies went out across the United States and the world. The declaration read, in part, "I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles 12 or 16 degrees. I pledge my life in support of this truth, and am ready to explore the hollow if the world will support and aid me in the undertaking." Sims was not a crank in the usual sense. He was a decorated veteran of the War of 1812, a man who had risen to the rank of captain through genuine bravery and competence. He was by all accounts earnest, intelligent, and utterly convinced of his theory. He had no formal scientific training beyond a good English education, but he had an insatiable curiosity about the natural world and had spent years contemplating the rings of Saturn, the formation of the planets, and what he believed must be a universal law of concentric spheres. His theory was a modification of Halley's. Sims proposed that the Earth consisted of 5 concentric shells, each open at the poles through enormous holes, which he estimated at roughly 1,400 miles in diameter. The rims of these holes, he believed, curved smoothly from the outer surface to the inner, so that a traveler approaching the North Pole would gradually, almost imperceptibly, transition from the outside of the planet to the inside without even realizing what was happening. He imagined the interior as a warm, lush, habitable landscape lit by sunlight filtering through the polar openings. A paradise of fertile soil, thriving vegetation, and possibly even human civilizations. The public reaction to Circular Number 1 was, predictably, devastating. Newspapers across the country mocked him mercilessly. His theory became a reliable source of jokes for editorial writers. His son, Americus, later recalled that the declaration was overwhelmed with ridicule as the production of a distempered imagination or the result of partial insanity. But Sims would not be deterred. For the next decade, he embarked on an extraordinary one-man campaign to prove his theory and win support for an expedition to the polar openings. He lectured across the country, from Ohio to New England to Quebec, speaking in towns and cities, at colleges and public halls, always in a stumbling, nasal voice that somehow managed to hold audiences' attention through the sheer force of his conviction. He charged modest admission fees and traveled with his stepson, enduring harsh weather, financial hardship, and unrelenting skepticism. He found allies. A newspaper editor named Jeremiah Reynolds became one of his most passionate converts, joining Sims on his lecture circuit before eventually branching out on his own to advocate for a polar expedition. A supporter named James McBride published a book in 1826 called Sims' Theory of Concentric Spheres, laying out the argument in systematic detail and calling for Congress to fund an expedition that would not only test the theory, but also open up vast new territories for colonization. And remarkably, Sims' idea gained enough traction to reach the halls of power. He petitioned Congress twice, in 1822 and 1823, for funding to mount an expedition. The first petition was quietly tabled. The second actually received 25 votes in support, a startling number for a proposal based on what most scientists considered pure fantasy. Reynolds continued lobbying after Sims' death, and the campaign ultimately reached the desk of President John Quincy Adams, who was sympathetic enough to explore the possibility. But Adams lost the 1828 election to Andrew Jackson, who shut down the entire project. Sims died on May 29, 1829, in Hamilton, Ohio. His health broken by years of grueling lecture tour. He never saw the poles. He never got his expedition. But his son Americus, who had been just 17 when his father died, dedicated years to preserving his legacy. He paid off his father's debts, published a collection of his papers, and erected a memorial in Hamilton that stands to this day. A stone pylon topped with a carved model of a hollow sphere, the only monument in the world dedicated to the hollow earth theory. What is striking about Sims, looking back, is not how wrong he was, but how close his methods came to legitimate scientific advocacy. He observed natural phenomena, constructed a hypothesis, sought evidence to support it, and campaigned publicly for an expedition that would test it. The hypothesis was wrong, but the impulse was recognizably scientific. In a different era, with a different starting assumption, a man of Sims' energy and determination might have made genuine contributions to polar exploration. In fact, Jeremiah Reynolds, the journalist who had been Sims' most devoted follower, eventually pivoted from hollow Earth advocacy to straightforward arguments for Antarctic exploration. His lobbying, combined with the residual momentum from the Sims campaign, helped lay the groundwork for the United States exploring expedition, which launched in 1838 under the command of Charles Wilkes. That expedition had nothing to do with hollow Earths, but it confirmed the existence of the Antarctic continent, mapped hundreds of islands in the Pacific, and collected specimens that would fill the Smithsonian Institution for years. In a roundabout way, Sims' obsession contributed to one of the greatest voyages of scientific discovery in American history. But Sims left something perhaps even more enduring than an accidental contribution to real science. He planted the hollow Earth firmly in the American imagination. And from there, a different kind of mind would pick it up and carry it into immortality. Not scientists, storytellers. In 1864, the French novelist Jules Verne published Journey to the Center of the Earth. And with it, the hollow Earth crossed a threshold from which it would never return. Verne's novel tells the story of a German professor and his nephew who descend into an Icelandic volcano and discover an enormous underground world populated by prehistoric creatures, vast subterranean oceans, and geological wonders beyond imagination. The book was a sensation. It was translated into dozens of languages, adapted into stage productions, and eventually films. And it cemented the image of a hidden world beneath our feet in the popular consciousness of the Western world. Verne was careful to frame his story as fiction. He was a meticulous researcher who prided himself on grounding his fantasies in real science. And he knew perfectly well that the scientific consensus of his day did not support a hollow interior, but that did not matter. The power of the story was irresistible. The idea of a hidden world, accessible through volcanic passages, populated by living fossils from Earth's deep past, resonated with something primal in the human imagination. It was the myth of Hades and Patala and Agartha, dressed up in the language of 19th century adventure fiction. Verne was not alone. Edgar Allan Poe, who died in 1849, had been fascinated by Sims' theories and wove elements of them into several of his works. His short story, Miss Found in a Bottle, published in 1833, describes a ship driven by a storm toward the South Pole and consumed by a massive whirlpool, an image that may have been directly inspired by the concept of Sims' Holes. His only complete novel, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, published in 1838, ends with the protagonist sailing into a mysterious white void near the South Pole. A passage so strange and evocative that it has been interpreted as a reference to the polar openings for generations. But perhaps the most influential literary elaboration of the hollow Earth came from Edgar Rice Burroughs, the creator of Tarzan. In 1914, Burroughs published At the Earth's Core, the first in his Pellucidar series. In these novels, a mining heir and an eccentric inventor ride a giant mechanical drill 500 miles down through the Earth's crust and emerge on the inner surface of a hollow world. Pellucidar is a fully realized fictional universe, lit by a stationary inner sun that creates perpetual noon, populated by dinosaurs, primitive human tribes, and a race of intelligent pterodactyls called the Mahars, who use telepathy to dominate their human slaves. Burroughs wrote 7 Pellucidar novels over the course of 5 decades, and the series proved popular enough to justify a crossover with Tarzan himself, who visits the inner world in Tarzan at the Earth's core. The Pellucidar books sold millions of copies and were adapted into comics, films, and television shows. They were not intended as scientific arguments. They were pulp adventure stories, pure escapism, but they did something that no scientific paper or lecture tour could do. They made the hollow Earth feel real. They gave it geography, ecology, politics, and characters that readers cared about. They transformed an abstract hypothesis into a place you could visit in your imagination. And this is a crucial part of the story. The hollow Earth survived not because of its scientific merits, which were non-existent, but because of its narrative power. Every generation of storytellers found new ways to bring it to life, and every new version of the story recruited new believers, or at least new enthusiasts, who kept the idea circulating in the cultural atmosphere. Edward Bulwer Lytton's 1871 novel, The Coming Race, imagined an advanced civilization living underground, powered by a mysterious energy called Vril. That novel gave us the word Vril, which became a cornerstone of later occult and conspiracy theories about hidden advanced civilizations beneath the earth. The influence of these stories was cumulative and self-reinforcing. Each new novel or film drew on the ones that came before, creating a web of references and associations that made the hollow Earth feel like a rich, well-documented tradition, rather than a thoroughly debunked pseudoscientific hypothesis. In the 20th century, the tradition continued unbroken. Amazing Stories, one of the first science fiction pulp magazines, ran a series of stories from 1945 to 1949 called The Shaver Mystery. Written by Richard Sharp Shaver, Shaver claimed, and the magazine's editor, Ray Palmer, encouraged the idea that a superior prehistoric race had built a honeycomb of caves inside the earth, and that their degenerate descendants still lived there, using abandoned technology to torment surface dwellers. The series generated enormous reader response and boosted the magazine's circulation dramatically, demonstrating that the public appetite for hollow Earth narratives was as robust as ever. In the 21st century, the tradition has migrated to film and video games. The MonsterVerse franchise, which includes Godzilla vs. Kong and its sequel Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, made the hollow Earth a central plot element, depicting it as the point of origin for the giant monsters known as Titans. These films reached hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide, while nobody is claiming that a summer blockbuster about giant lizards fighting giant apes constitutes evidence for a hollow planet. The cultural impact is real. The hollow Earth has been normalized as a fictional setting, which makes it feel more plausible to audiences who may not clearly distinguish between entertainment and reality. And this is a crucial part of the story. The hollow Earth survived not because of its scientific merits, which were non-existent, but because of its narrative power. Every generation of storytellers found new ways to bring it to life, and every new version of the story recruited new believers, or at least new enthusiasts, who kept the idea circulating in the cultural atmosphere. Fiction does not just reflect culture, it shapes it. And in the case of the hollow Earth, fiction has done more to keep the idea alive than any scientific argument ever could. Not everyone who embraced the hollow Earth did so through fiction. Some took it to places that were far stranger and far darker. In 1869, in upstate New York, a physician and amateur alchemist named Cyrus Reed Teed was conducting experiments in his laboratory involving dangerously high levels of electricity. During one experiment, he was badly shocked and lost consciousness. When he came to, he reported a visionary experience. A beautiful woman had appeared to him and revealed the true structure of the universe and his role as a new Messiah. Teed changed his name to Korsh, the Hebrew equivalent of Cyrus, and began preaching what he called Korshanity. At its center was a cosmological claim so bizarre that it makes conventional hollow Earth theories look modest by comparison. Teed did not merely believe that the Earth was hollow. He believed that we live on the inside. In Teed's cellular cosmogony, the entire universe is contained within a single sphere, roughly 8,000 miles in diameter. Humanity lives on the concave inner surface. The sun, moon, and stars are not distant objects in an infinite cosmos, but are illusions generated by a rotating electromagnetic battery at the center of the sphere. Hovering above us in the enclosed atmosphere, there is nothing outside the sphere. No outer space, no other planets, no infinite void, just the shell of the Earth extending outward in all directions forever. Teed gathered followers. At its peak in the 1890s, his Korshan Unity movement attracted as many as 4,000 adherents. In 1894, they established a communal settlement in Estero, Florida, where they built a bakery, a general store, a power plant, a printing press, and what they called the World College of Life. They published their own newspaper, the Flaming Sword. They founded their own political party. They were, by all accounts, industrious and sincere. In 1897, Teed's followers conducted an experiment on the beaches of Naples, Florida, to prove their theory using an apparatus they called a rectilineator, a device made of mahogany and brass designed to project a perfectly straight line over a distance of several miles. They attempted to demonstrate that the Earth's surface curves upward, consistent with a concave interior. After months of painstaking work, they reported a deviation of roughly 4 inches over their baseline, which they interpreted as proof of concavity. Independent scientists noted that the deviation was more easily explained by the natural sagging of the apparatus under its own weight. But the Korsians were satisfied. Teed died at 1908 after being severely beaten during a confrontation in Fort Myers. His followers expected him to be resurrected, as he had prophesied. They kept vigil over his body for 2 days. When decomposition set in, the county health officer stepped in and ordered his burial. The movement went into rapid decline, and the last surviving member deeded the remaining property to the state of Florida in 1961. Today, the Korsian State Historic Site preserves what is left of their settlement. A quiet, sun-dappled park along the Estero River, where visitors can walk among the buildings of a community that genuinely believed the stars were chunks of ice floating inside a cosmic egg. The Korsian episode might seem like an isolated curiosity, a colorful footnote in the history of American eccentricity. But it illustrates something important about why the hollow Earth refuses to disappear. Teed did not just offer a theory about the shape of the planet. He offered a complete worldview, a community, a sense of purpose, and a feeling of special knowledge. His followers did not just believe in a concave Earth. They believed in themselves as enlightened beings who had seen through the illusions that blinded the rest of humanity. That sense of possessing hidden knowledge, of being part of an elect group, is one of the most powerful psychological forces in human nature, and it would only grow more potent as the 20th century unfolded. It is worth noting, too, that Korsianity was not the only such movement. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, America produced an extraordinary number of utopian communes built around unconventional cosmologies and pseudoscientific beliefs. What made Korsianity distinctive was the specificity and ambition of its core claim. Most religious movements ask you to believe in something invisible, a god, a spirit, an afterlife. Teed asked his followers to believe something that directly contradicted the evidence of their own senses, that the sky above them was not infinite space, but the interior of a giant sphere, and they did believe it for decades, building entire lives around it. This demonstrates something about the power of community and charismatic leadership to override rational evaluation of evidence, a dynamic that repeats itself in every era, including our own. The darkest chapter in the history of the hollow Earth intersects with one of the darkest chapters in all of human history. The legend of Agartha, which we encountered briefly in our survey of ancient myths, took on an entirely new character in the 19th and 20th centuries as it was adopted and transformed by European occultists. The French esotericist Alexander Saint-Yves d'Alvader published a book in the 1880s portraying Agartha as a real subterranean kingdom, still accessible beneath the Himalayas, governed by enlightened masters who secretly influenced the course of human history. His ideas were picked up by Ferdynand Ossendowski, a Polish writer who claimed in his 1922 book Beasts, Men and Gods, that he had heard accounts of Agartha from Mongolian lamas during his travels through Central Asia. Helena Blavatsky, the Russian co-founder of the Theosophical Society, folded the concept into her elaborate mythology of root races and spiritual hierarchies, claiming that Agartha was part of a vast network of caves Beneath, Tibet inhabited by enlightened beings called Asuras. These were the streams that converged in early 20th century Germany, where a constellation of occult movements began weaving the hollow earth into elaborate mythologies about lost civilizations, master races, and secret powers hidden beneath the surface of the planet. The Thule Society, a secretive group of German nationalists with deep interests in Aryan mythology and the occult, became fascinated with the legends of Agartha and Shambhala. They speculated that Agartha housed the remnants of an ancient Aryan superrace, possessing advanced technology and transcendent knowledge. Some members proposed expeditions to find entrances to this subterranean homeland, particularly at the poles. The Thule Society's membership overlapped significantly with the early Nazi Party. While it is debated how much direct influence the Society's occult beliefs had on Nazi ideology, there is no question that elements of mystical pseudohistory permeated the thinking of some senior Nazi officials. The Ahnenerbe, the SS organization dedicated to pseudo-archaeological research, sponsored expeditions to Tibet and other locations, ostensibly to study ancient civilizations, but according to some accounts, also motivated by esoteric beliefs about subterranean kingdoms. The fascist writer Wilhelm Landig wrote a series of novels depicting Agartha and Shambhala as repositories of Aryan heritage, and in doing so coined the black sun symbol that would later become associated with neo-Nazi movements worldwide. After the war, the hollow earth became entangled with a different kind of mythology, one involving Admiral Richard Evelyn Bayard, one of the most decorated American explorers of the 20th century. Bayard was a genuine hero, a pioneering aviator who led multiple expeditions to both poles. He flew over the North Pole in 1926, led the first motorized exploration of Antarctica, and commanded Operation High Jump, a massive naval expedition to the southern continent in 1946 and 1947. It was Operation High Jump that would become the seed of a conspiracy theory that persists to this day. The expedition was terminated earlier than planned, after roughly 2 months, and the early return was never fully explained to the public's satisfaction. In the years after Bayard's death in 1957, a so-called secret diary surfaced, allegedly describing a flight into the interior of the Earth through a polar opening. According to this diary, Bayard encountered a lush, green landscape, woolly mammoths, and a technologically advanced civilization that warned him about humanity's use of nuclear weapons. The diary was published in 1964 by a man calling himself Dr. Raymond Bernard, whose real name was Walter Siegmeister, a disgraced pseudoscientific dietitian who advocated for eugenics, mass colonization, and vegetarianism as paths to a new golden age. Bernard's book, The Hollow Earth, became the foundational text of modern hollow earth conspiracy theory. The problems with the diary are numerous and devastating. The diary is dated February 1947 and describes a flight over the North Pole, but Operation High Jump, which took place at that time, was focused on the South Pole, not the North. Bayed's actual first flight over the North Pole occurred more than 20 years earlier, in 1926, and he made no mention of underground civilizations. No historian has ever authenticated the diary. Bayed's own published writings and speeches contain no references to hollow Earth theories whatsoever. None of this matters to true believers. The Bayed diary has become a sacred text of the hollow Earth movement, endlessly reproduced, discussed, and defended in online communities. It is a perfect example of what psychologists call motivated reasoning. Once a person has committed emotionally to a belief, they will find ways to explain away any evidence that contradicts it. Are the dates wrong? The government changed them. The locations do not match. That is because the real expedition was classified. Has no historian authenticated the diary? Of course not. Historians are part of the cover-up. Every objection becomes, in the mind of the believer, further proof that the conspiracy runs deeper than anyone imagined. The Bayed legend also demonstrates how conspiracy theories compound. Modern hollow Earth believers do not just believe the Earth is hollow. They also tend to believe that the government is actively concealing this fact, that satellite images of the poles have been doctored to remove the polar openings, that travel to Antarctica is restricted or banned to prevent ordinary people from discovering the truth, and that an elite cabal of world leaders knows about the inner world and is deliberately keeping the rest of humanity ignorant. Each of these subsidiary beliefs requires its own set of evidence-free assumptions, but together they form an internally consistent narrative that can absorb any contradictory information and transform it into supporting evidence. And with the rise of the internet and social media, the hollow Earth found an entirely new ecosystem in which to thrive. Instagram posts claiming the existence of enormous voids beneath Antarctica go viral. YouTube channels dedicated to the topic accumulate millions of views. Online communities share satellite images with supposed anomalies, old maps with mysterious annotations, and out-of-context quotes from polar explorers, all woven together into an ever-expanding web of speculation that feels, to those inside it, like genuine research. So what does science actually tell us about the interior of the Earth? The answer is remarkably detailed, and it has been built up over more than a century of careful observation, experimentation, and analysis. We cannot physically visit the deep interior. The deepest hole ever drilled by human beings, the Kola superdeep borehole on the Kola Peninsula of northwestern Russia, reached a depth of just over 7.5 miles, roughly 12,262 meters. That is an impressive achievement, but it only penetrated about 1/3 of the way through the Earth's crust at that location, which itself is a vanishingly thin layer compared to the planet's full radius of nearly 4,000 miles. In terms of reaching the center, we have barely scratched the surface. But we do not need to drill to the center to know what is down there. We have something far more powerful than any drill bit: earthquakes. Every time an earthquake occurs anywhere on the planet, it sends shockwaves radiating outward in all directions. These seismic waves travel through the interior of the Earth, and as they do, they change speed change direction and sometimes stop entirely, depending on the density, temperature, and physical state of the material they encounter. By placing sensitive instruments called seismometers all over the surface of the planet and carefully recording how long it takes these waves to arrive and from what direction, scientists can construct an extraordinarily detailed picture of what lies beneath. There are two main types of seismic body waves. P waves, or primary waves, are compressional waves that can travel through both solid rock and liquid. S waves, or secondary waves, are shear waves that can only travel through solid material. They cannot pass through liquid at all. This difference is crucial. In the early 1900s, a Croatian seismologist named Andrija Mohorovičić noticed that seismic waves arriving from earthquakes beyond a certain distance behaved unexpectedly. They arrived sooner than they should have, suggesting they had traveled through a deeper layer where the rock was denser and wave speeds were faster. He had discovered the boundary between the Earth's crust and the underlying mantle, a boundary now called the Mohorovičić discontinuity, or MOHO for short. In 1914, a German-American seismologist named Benno Gutenberg went deeper. He discovered that beyond a certain angular distance from an earthquake, no P waves were recorded at all, creating what is called a shadow zone. He correctly interpreted this as evidence of a liquid layer beginning at a depth of about 1,800 miles, the outer core. S waves disappeared entirely beyond that point, confirming that the outer core is indeed liquid, because shear waves cannot propagate through fluid. But the most elegant discovery came from a Danish seismologist named Inge Lehmann. In 1929, a powerful earthquake struck near New Zealand. Lehmann, working in Copenhagen, noticed something peculiar in the seismic data. Some P waves were appearing in locations where the shadow zone should have prevented them from arriving. They should not have been there, but there they were. Lehmann had an idea. She proposed that there was a boundary within the liquid outer core, a smaller, denser sphere at the very center of the planet, a solid inner core. Waves hitting this inner boundary would be refracted, sent off in new directions, and could emerge from the shadow zone in exactly the places where Lehmann was detecting them. In 1936, she published her theory in a paper titled simply P'. It is one of the most influential papers in the history of geophysics, and one of the most elegantly titled. Just two characters, P and a prime symbol. Nothing more. And yet those two characters overturned everything scientists thought they knew about the deepest reaches of our planet. The story of Lehmann's discovery is itself a testament to what real science looks like, as opposed to pseudoscience. She did not start with a conclusion and search for evidence to support it. She started with evidence that did not fit the existing model and searched for a better explanation. She was rigorous, methodical, and willing to challenge the consensus of far more established male colleagues in an era when women in science faced enormous institutional barriers. When the great Harold Jeffreys initially dismissed her work, she reportedly told her nephew, "You should know how many incompetent men I had to compete with in vain." She persisted, and she was right. She lived to the age of 104. long enough to see her discovery confirmed beyond any doubt, and honored with medals, honorary degrees, and a seismic discontinuity named after her within a few years of her paper. Leading seismologists like Gutenberg, Richter, and Jeffries had adopted her interpretation. By 1971, computer calculations confirmed she was right, and in 2023, researchers at the Australian National University published evidence of yet another layer, a distinct innermost inner core, a solid metallic ball sitting at the very center of the planet, bringing the total number of confirmed layers to 5. The picture that emerges from more than a century of seismological research is unambiguous. The Earth consists of a thin, rigid crust, averaging about 20 miles thick, a massive mantle of hot, dense silicate rock, extending to a depth of about 1,800 miles, a liquid outer core of molten iron and nickel, extending to about 3,200 miles, and a solid inner core of crystalline iron, roughly 760 miles in radius, about the size of Pluto, and roughly as hot as the surface of the Sun. There is no cavity. There is no interior space. There is no hollow shell. If the Earth were hollow, seismic waves would behave in ways radically different from what we observe. There would be no shadow zone. There would be no S-wave cutoff at the outer core. The patterns of wave arrivals that we record every single day at thousands of stations worldwide would make no sense at all. And there are other lines of evidence as well. The Earth's average density is about 5.5 grams per cubic centimeter. But surface rocks average only about 2.75 grams per cubic centimeter. The only way to account for this discrepancy is for the interior to be far denser than the surface, which rules out any significant internal void. The Earth's magnetic field, generated by convective currents in the liquid iron outer core through a process called the geodynamo, requires a dense, metallic, partially fluid interior. A hollow Earth could not generate the magnetic field we measure. Even the planet's gravitational field, precisely mapped by satellites, is consistent with a solid, layered interior, and utterly inconsistent with a hollow shell. The Kola superdeep borehole, drilled by Soviet scientists from 1970 to 1994, added its own surprises and its own humbling lessons about how little we truly know about the ground beneath our feet. The project began during the height of the Cold War as part of a quiet competition between superpowers. While the United States and the Soviet Union were racing to the stars, they were also racing in the opposite direction, drilling toward the mantle. The Americans had attempted Project Mohole in the early 1960s, trying to punch through the ocean floor to reach the mantle. But Congress defunded the project in 1966 due to budget overruns and infighting. The Soviets were more persistent. They selected a site on the Kola Peninsula near the Norwegian border and began drilling in May of 1970. For 2 decades, the drill bored deeper and deeper into rock that was billions of years old. Rock that had never seen sunlight, never been touched by wind, never been exposed to any atmosphere. The project required the invention of new drilling techniques, including a rotary bit that spun by sending pressurized mud through a turbine at the drill head. Because the sheer weight of conventional drill pipe at those depths would have been impossible to rotate from the surface. At 7.5 miles down, temperatures reached 356 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly twice what scientists had predicted. The rock at that depth was so hot that it behaved more like plastic than solid stone, deforming around the drill bit and making further progress impossible. The expected transition from granite to basalt that seismic data had suggested never materialized, forcing geologists to revise their models of the continental crust. But what the borehole did find was remarkable. Ancient microfossils over 2 billion years old, fossilized plankton preserved in rock at depths where life was once thought impossible. Mineral-rich water sealed under unimaginable pressure and unexpected concentrations of hydrogen, helium, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. Evidence of a chemically active interior far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Today, the Kola Superdeep borehole site is abandoned. The drilling equipment has been dismantled. A rusting maintenance hole cover, secured with a dozen heavy bolts, sits in a cracked concrete slab in the middle of a desolate field. Beneath that cover, just 9 inches in diameter, is the deepest point any human being has ever reached into the planet. At that point, impressive as it is, represents just 0.19% of the distance to the Earth's center. To put it in perspective, if the Earth were an apple, the Kola borehole would not even have broken through the skin. Everything the borehole discovered pointed to a complex, dynamic, and very solid interior. Nothing they found supported any version of a hollow Earth. But the sheer difficulty of reaching even those modest depths underscores something that hollow Earth believers find psychologically compelling. We have barely begun to explore what lies beneath us. And in that gap between what we know and what we have directly observed, imagination flourishes. So we have arrived at the real question. The science is settled. The Earth is not hollow. The evidence is overwhelming and comes from multiple independent lines of investigation. And yet, millions of people either believe or are at least sympathetic to the idea that it might be. Why? The answer lies not in geology or physics, but in psychology. Research into conspiracy thinking, much of it conducted over the last 2 decades, has identified 3 broad categories of motivation that drive people toward beliefs like the hollow Earth. Psychologists call them epistemic, existential, and social motives. Epistemic motives relate to the need to understand the world. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. Our brains evolved to detect relationships between events, to find causes for effects, and to construct narratives that make sense of our experience. This is generally a good thing. It is how we learn, but it also makes us vulnerable to seeing patterns where none exist and constructing explanations that feel satisfying even when they are wrong. The hollow Earth theory offers an explanation for a vast range of otherwise unconnected phenomena, from magnetic anomalies to the aurora borealis to the migration patterns of Arctic birds. The explanation is incorrect, but it is comprehensive and internally consistent. and for people who lack the scientific training to evaluate it critically. It can feel more convincing than the actual explanations, which are often complex, counterintuitive, and require specialized knowledge to understand. Existential motives relate to the need for security and control. The real world is a frightening place. Natural disasters, disease, economic instability, and political chaos, all of these things make people feel powerless and vulnerable. Conspiracy theories, including fringe beliefs like the hollow earth, can function as a psychological defense mechanism. If there is a secret order to the universe, if powerful beings or advanced civilizations are hiding beneath the surface, then the chaos of the world above might have a hidden logic. The universe is not random. It is being managed. There is a plan. This feeling of hidden order can be profoundly comforting, even if the specific beliefs are nonsensical. Social motives relate to the need for belonging and identity. Belief in the hollow earth, like belief in any conspiracy theory, creates an instant community. You are no longer alone. You are part of a group of enlightened individuals who have seen through the lies of the mainstream, who possess knowledge that ordinary people do not have, who are special. Research has consistently shown that conspiracy belief is linked to a need for uniqueness, the desire to feel different from and superior to the general population. It is also linked to narcissism, which involves a conviction about one's own superiority and entitlement to special recognition. People drawn to conspiracy theories often feel marginalized or powerless in their everyday lives, and the experience of possessing secret knowledge can provide a powerful boost to self-esteem. And then there is the engine that has supercharged all of these dynamics in the 21st century: the internet. Social media algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, and conspiracy theories are among the most engaging content on the internet. They are endlessly intriguing, emotionally charged, and structured to reward further investigation. Once you watch one hollow earth video on YouTube, the algorithm will serve you 10 more. Once you join one online community, you will be recommended to a dozen others. The platforms create what researchers call echo chambers, self-reinforcing environments where dissenting voices are filtered out and confirming voices are amplified, making beliefs feel more widespread and more credible than they actually are. A study published by researchers at Texas Tech University found that flat Earth videos, which share many characteristics with hollow Earth content, significantly outnumbered debunking videos on YouTube, were almost twice as long on average, and were far more likely to include conspiracy ideation and science denial. The ecosystem is stacked in favor of the conspiracy, not because the platforms endorse the beliefs, but because the beliefs generate clicks, and clicks generate revenue. There is also a simpler, more human explanation, as Andrew Campbell, a professor of geophysics at the University of Chicago, has observed. The interior of the planet is inaccessible to human visitation, and probably always will be. We cannot go there. We cannot see it with our own eyes. And so, inevitably, people conjure fantasies about what lies there. The hollow earth endures for the same reason that legends about sea monsters endured For as long as the deep ocean remained unexplored, mystery abhors a vacuum, and the human imagination rushes in to fill it. And there is one more factor worth considering. The hollow Earth is not just a conspiracy theory. It is, as we have seen, a myth, one with roots stretching back thousands of years to the very dawn of human storytelling. The Greek underworld, the Hindu Patala, the Norse Niflheim, the Tibetan Shambhala, the Navajo emergence caves. All of these are stories about a hidden world beneath our own, a world that contains answers to questions we cannot otherwise resolve. The hollow Earth theory, in all its modern forms, is the latest expression of this ancient impulse. It wears the costume of science, or at least of pseudoscience. But underneath, it is the same old story. There is more to reality than what we can see, and the truth is hidden just out of reach, waiting for someone brave or clever enough to find it. This is not a story that science can kill, because it was never really a scientific story to begin with. It is a human story, born from the same place in our minds that produces art, religion, and philosophy. Science can disprove the specific claims. It can show that the Earth is not hollow, that there are no polar openings, that no inner sun hangs in a subterranean sky. And it has done all of these things, conclusively and repeatedly. But it cannot extinguish the yearning that gave rise to the claims in the first place. That yearning, the need for wonder, the hunger for hidden worlds, the desire to believe that the universe contains more than we have yet discovered, is built into us at a level that no amount of seismic data can reach. And so we come to the end. The hollow Earth is not a scientific theory. It never really was, not even in Halley's day. It is a story, one of the oldest and most universal stories that human beings have ever told. It is the story of another world beneath this one, a world that is hidden, powerful, and full of secrets. It takes different forms in different cultures and different centuries. Sometimes it is Hades. Sometimes it is Agartha. Sometimes it is Pellucidar. Sometimes it is a YouTube video with 2 million views claiming that NASA is hiding the polar openings from the public. But at its core, if you will pardon the expression, it is always the same story. It is the story of a species that looked at the ground beneath its feet and could not resist the urge to imagine what might be hiding down there. It is the story of our insatiable curiosity, our desperate need for mystery, our stubborn refusal to accept that the universe might be exactly as strange and wonderful and relentlessly physical as the evidence suggests. The Earth is not hollow, but the human need for wonder apparently has no bottom. In a way, though, the real Earth is far more fascinating than any hollow fantasy, the actual interior of our planet. A churning ocean of liquid iron, generating a magnetic shield that protects all life from the solar wind, a solid inner core, as hot as the surface of the sun, slowly crystallizing grain by grain over billions of years. Ancient microfossils preserved 7 miles down in rock that predates every living thing that has ever walked or swum or flown. This is a story that requires no fabrication, no conspiracy, and no hidden civilizations. It is enough. It is more than enough. The real mystery of the Earth's interior is not that it is hollow. It is that something so violent, so hot, so hostile to everything we know as life, somehow gave rise to the thin, fragile, miraculous shell on which we live. The crust of the Earth, the only part we will ever touch, is thinner relative to the planet than the skin of an apple. And on that impossibly thin layer, everything we have ever known, every civilization, every story, every myth about underground kingdoms has played out. That is the true wonder. Not that there might be another world beneath our feet, but that this one, the one we actually inhabit, is so improbable, so extraordinary, and so worth understanding. You have been watching. If you enjoyed this journey into one of humanity's most persistent myths, do not forget to hit like and subscribe. Leave us a comment and tell us what you think. Is there a pseudo-scientific idea that you find fascinating even though you know it is wrong? We would love to hear about it. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.